Would the Buddha have known what the Brahman was in his lifetime? This is a very good question that I got on my YouTube channel from a very thoughtful response by Jura. So thanks for this response, Jura. I'm going to respond to it a little bit. Would the Buddha in his lifetime know of the concept of Brahman in the Hindu traditions as we know it today, or would that concept have developed later? I see many fellow Buddhists take a sharp stance against the Brahman, as it's basically the big self, yes. However, this is personally my opinion, we're good with that. I don't seem to actually see much difference between the Brahman and certain Buddhist schools of thought regarding ultimate reality. That's a great point that we'll come back to. So, the first clear clinical answer I can give is that yes, the Buddha would have known what the Brahman was. He understood it in the way that we understand it now as the cosmic self, the single reality. And the reason that we know this is twofold, really. So the first is that the Brahman in this way was already ancient at the time the Buddha lived. And we know this because of things like the Vedas and the Upanishads. All right. So when we're talking about the Upanishads, we can get hung up on the dates. They have a very wide sort of range of dating, but a few we know for sure that the Buddha was aware of, or at least the canon tells us that the Buddha was aware of them, so we're as sure as we can get on the evidence that we have. And one of the suttas that illustrate this is the Tavijja Sutta, all right, in the Digha Nikaya. And in this sutta, the Buddha parodies the different types of Brahmins, okay, so the people the priestly caste who propagate the Vedas, who propagate the Upanishads. And he says, even though Brahmins describe different paths, the Advaryu Brahmins, the Tatiriya Brahmins, the Chandogya Brahmins, and then it goes on. This is reference to the Upanishads. So, what do these Upanishads say about the Brahman? Do they talk about it in the way that we're accustomed now? I have here, very handy, Olive Owl book, I think. Yes, translation of the Upanishads. It's very nice. If you don't want to be bogged down in Sanskrit word by word, which many of you don't. And here we can see Chandogya Upanishad talking about what the Brahman is. All right, and this will sound familiar. So we have in chapter 3, verse 18, with respect to the bodily sphere, Atman, one should venerate Brahman is the mind, and with respect to the divine sphere, Brahman is space. So we're talking about Brahman permeating space and our own selves, souls, as a unitary substance. A little bit further on in chapter 8. Now, what is called space is that which brings forth name and visible appearance. That within with it, which they are located, that is Brahman, that is the immortal, that is the Atman. All right, and we can go through these and find all sorts of different examples of this going on. But the short answer here is clearly the canonical material tells us that the Buddha was aware of at least some of the Upanishads. Now, the Upanishads were living documents even at the time of the Buddha, so they would have been getting written, rewritten. There's a lot of work been done on this by people like Patrick Olivelle, people like Johannes Bronkhorst, lots of other people. And we can't be 100% sure of anything. But the canonical traditions tell us that the Buddha was aware of this stuff. And it tells us that the Buddha took the mick out of it a little bit and critiqued the belief systems of Brahmins who did propagate the content of the Upanishads. So the Brahman was a concept about which the Buddha would have been aware. The context of it is largely the same as we would understand it today, sort of immaterial, unitary substance permeating all things that exist. But yes, the Buddha was aware of it.